Who are the 53 players who are going to make the Panthers roster? I'll tell you right now on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, because the weekly Friday mailbag is back this Friday, so either at me or DM me. But of course, follow me on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find a qualified candidate you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We are so close to having football back here in Carolina as the Panthers rookies reported to training camp on Friday. The vets are going to report tomorrow on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, training camp practice begins 9:30 a.m. sharp Eastern Standard Time over at the practice facility off Cedar Street in Uptown Charlotte. No more Wofford, unfortunately, but training camp going to be here in Charlotte. So on today's show, heading to training camp, I want to tell you the 53 men who I think are going to be on the initial 53-man roster come August 27th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in Charlotte, as Panthers got to go from 90 to 53 players by that point in time. We'll start seeing cuts after they have their dress rehearsal, preseason game number 3 at Buffalo. We'll start seeing the cuts on Sunday, then on Monday, but then we'll see the bulk of them happen there on that Tuesday as the initial 53-man roster is announced. And again, it's initial. The roster is never set until, well, you get to the playoffs. You can only have a certain amount of players on the roster then, but up until then, we'll see moves made all throughout the 18 weeks of this upcoming season here in Carolina. So let's talk about it. Offense first, then defense. And at the end of the show, there are some positions I think the Panthers need to address once they do make roster cuts and they go to the waiver wire, as they're going to have top priority. There are a few positions I think they probably could and should address once we get to that point in time on August 27th. But start off with the offense. I have 25 players on the offense making the roster here in Carolina. Starting off at quarterback. This one is tricky for me heading into training camp and the preseason. Bryce Young, Andy Dalton, obviously those two are going to be on the roster. Bryce as your starter once again, Andy as a veteran backup. And I did not decide to add a third quarterback right now. Jack Plummer, I just don't see it. I really don't. And when you have Bryce, do you really need another young developmental quarterback? And I want to say that Jack Plummer is probably older than Bryce Young. The dude played college football for 6 damn years. He played at Purdue, then at Cal, then got back with his old head coach, Jeff Brom, at Louisville. He had been in college forever. And yes, Louisville was great last season. They got to the ACC title game. I don't know if they were great. They were a beneficiary of their terrible schedule, because that is the ACC nowadays. Everyone has a bad schedule. That's a conversation that's not really pertinent to this. I wasn't impressed by him. And I can't imagine the Panthers are going to waste a roster spot on Jack Plummer. I sure hope they wouldn't. It would be great for him and his family if he gets this opportunity. But the other guys that spent like 6 years in college, like Michael Penix Jr., tore it up the last 2 years. We saw Bo Nix tear it up. They were first-round picks. This guy spent 6 years and still couldn't get drafted. I'm not trying to bash Jack Plummer. I just feel like it's a waste of time to have someone on a roster who you never want to play and is going to be an emergency backup. And you heard me last year. I was vehemently against it. I'm still against it now. Dave Canales said they would like to have a third quarterback, but if they're going to have a third quarterback, let it be a vet. Let it be someone who's actually played games in the NFL and not someone who spent the last half decade plus in college and still couldn't get drafted. So no, thank you. 2 quarterbacks, running backs. I have the Panthers taking 4. This is a position that they're going to value here, as we've already seen with Jonathan Brooks being selected in the second round. The contract they gave Miles Sanders last offseason. Dan Morgan, now the general manager, was the assistant GM last year. Liked the deal. He was here. He still believes in it. And they've come out and said they want to be stubborn at running the football and that running backs matter here in Carolina, which, oh, man, it's tough for me to hear that. It sickens me in a way, joking, of course, but also like, why care about the running back position that much? But the 4 I think will make the roster. Chuba Hubbard, obviously coming into training camp as RB1, maybe later on going to be RB1A, as long as this player, Jonathan Brooks, their second round pick out of Texas, is able to get healthy. We'll find out fairly soon, probably tomorrow, whether he is going to be good to go to start training camp, or if he's going to start on a pup or whatnot. We'll find out very soon. Miles Sanders will be on the roster once again. If they were going to get rid of him, they would have done it back in March or April or May or right after June 1. They have not done it, and they weren't going to save much space by doing it. And considering that this offense wants to utilize running back a lot, makes sense to have a third experienced running back who's been a Pro Bowler in the past. And then the 4th one, if you're going to be a 4th-string running back, you better play special teams. Raheem Blackshear makes the roster because of that. Rashad Penny, I don't see it. Dude barely played in Philadelphia last year, rarely was healthy when he was with this staff in Seattle. I don't think he's better than Chuba. I don't think he's better than Jonathan Brooks. I damn sure also don't believe he's better than Miles Sanders, and he's not going to help you in a return game. So Raheem Blackshear, he takes a spot as the 4th running back. Wide receivers. This one's a little tricky for me after you get past the top 4. Deontay Johnson, obviously on the roster, going to play the X, going to be the number 1 receiver here, first read. Adam Thielen, once again, back here in the slot. Xavier Legette, the first-round pick out of South Carolina. He's on the roster. Jonathan Mingo coming off a disappointing rookie season, heading into his sophomore year here in the NFL. Hopefully he can develop under an offensive coaching staff that has a ton of coaches that have either coached wide receiver or played the position when coming up in football. Those are the top 4 who are clearly on the roster. I also believe Amir Smith-Marset is going to be on the roster as the punt returner again in Carolina. Maybe it's an opportunity to be a kick returner. Did not do that last year. That was Blackshear's job. And I imagine it'll be Blackshear and Legette who get the first crack at that once training camp begins and the preseason begins. And of course, the regular season starts later on in September. I'm going to take 6 receivers. The last spot, I'm going to give it to Jalen Coker, the undrafted free agent out of Holy Cross. Steve Smith Sr. spoke highly about him. The Panthers gave Coker a pretty nice guaranteed deal for an undrafted player. He was outstanding the last couple of years under Bob Chesney there at Holy Cross. And I just feel like Terrace Marshall Jr.'s time's come up. He asked for a trade last year. The Panthers couldn't trade him, so he was inactive for like 6 weeks in a row. The next time he got to play, he lined up incorrectly, illegal formation, brought back a touchdown. One of the best players we saw all season long. That Bryce Young got out of the pocket, threw it down, I believe, of Raheem Blackshear for a touchdown. And Terrace Marshall not being able to line up properly, fundamental stuff, brought that back. Also had a career day. Frank Reich forgot about him, and you can see why he would have been forgotten about. I just don't think it's going to happen for TMJ here in Carolina. If that's the case, move on and let a young player who Canales spoke highly of when asked about him, at least at length about, let that guy get an opportunity. So I'm going to take Jalen Coker over Terrace Marshall there as the 6th wide receiver if they do take 6. Tight ends, pretty straightforward here. There's only 5 in the room, and I don't think one of them has a chance at making the roster. That being Jordan Matthews was here because of Frank Reich, spent time in Philadelphia. Frank Reich is not here on the team anymore as the head coach. Tommy Trimble, he's on the roster. Tavion Sanders, 4th-round pick out of Texas, of course, on the roster. Ian Thomas, the survivor, back once again in Carolina, playing that role as a run-blocking tight end. And because this is a staff that comes from Seattle and has experience with this player, Stephon Sullivan going to be the 4th tight end. The Seahawks only kept 3. If they only keep 3 here in Carolina, it's going to be Trimble, it's going to be Sanders, it's going to be Thomas. But I'm going to say right now, they keep 4, and Stephon Sullivan makes the roster here. Those are your tight ends. Then the offensive line, I had the Panthers keeping 9 offensive linemen. And because of the versatility of one of the players, they don't really need to keep 10. I mean, they may be able to only keep 8 if they wanted to do that. I think they'll keep 9. Ike Ekwonu is your starting left tackle. Damian Lewis, your starting left guard. Austin Corbett, your starting center. Robert Hunt, your starting right guard. And Taylor Moton, your starting right tackle. After that, Yosh Nijman is your swing tackle coming over from Green Bay in free agency. He's clearly on the roster. Brady Christensen back on the final year of his deal what position he's going to play. Is he going to be the backup center? He's going to be a backup guard. He's going to be the other tackle behind Josh Nijman as far as backups go. He could play all three, which is why I think he's safely on the roster because of that versatility. Not great for him come next March when he enters free agency, as teams aren't going to know what his true position is. And I think many of you would probably say tackle. He's not going to get a chance to play tackle before Icky or Taylor or Josh this season, it appears. Cade Mays, he was better last year at points than he had been in the past. And it was weird because we felt like he was more of a right guard, but he played left guard much better than he played right guard last year. I think he makes it. And then the final player, I'm going to take Chandler Zavala over Ricky Lee, who made the roster last year, 53 initially last year out of A&T, didn't play, still a developmental tackle. When you bring in Josh Nijman, you bring back Brady Christensen, you already have Icky and you already have Taylor. I don't think you need to have a fourth tackle, a fourth true tackle on the roster. Might as well take Chandler Zavala. You drafted him last year. Morgan was here. A lot of the people still in the front office were here last season. Allow this guy to develop. You brought in Hunt and Lewis, so you wouldn't have to watch him play. But I figure why not continue to develop him? And I think he can probably get Ricky Lee onto the practice squad. So those are 25 players I think will make the initial 53-man roster heading into training camp. My opinion could change as we go through training camp and the preseason. Some conversations. I'll probably have some people along the way once we get down to the end of August where I'll give my final projections of who's going to make the initial 53. But right now, I'm taking 25 players on offense, 2 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, 6 wide receivers, 4 tight ends, and 9 offensive linemen. How many players are going to take on defense? If you do the math, there's 3 players on special teams you got to keep. So that means 25 players also on defense. Who are going to be the 25? I'll tell you here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But with the playoffs long gone and the Euro gone, also CONCACAF, Copa America no longer around, we have fewer games, but we're getting close to sports being back. But right now, sports aren't sportsing like I want them to, but FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. The Panthers, after they're done with training camp, will have 25 players on offense. They'll also have 3 players on special teams, and they're going to have 25 players on defense. Who will those 25 be? Well, let's go ahead and look at it right now. Looking at the defensive line, when doing my roster evaluations over the last couple of weeks, I felt like D-line was a position group that was likely to have more players on the roster this year than they did last year. And it was nice knowing that Ejiro Evero is back, that whole defensive coaching staff is back, makes it a little bit easier to project how many players they may keep and who they liked last year, the roles that they played. Although I'm imagining Dan Morgan's going to get the final say here in Carolina. Dave Canales, of course, will have some input there. We'll see how it pans out. But I think they're going to keep 6 defensive linemen as we head here into training camp. Derek Brown, obviously on the roster after a Pro Bowl season, could be an All-Pro this season. If the Panthers can get their act together and the rest of the NFL can see just how damn good this player is. A'Shawn Robinson, they brought him over to replace Deshaun Williams there on the defensive line. He'll also be a starter and on the roster. Shai Tuttle coming off of a disappointing season. He comes back once again as a starter in Carolina. Behind them, the 3 I'm taking are the 6th round pick, out of Mississippi State, Jaden Crumedy. He's going to make the roster. Nick Thurman, who really impressed late in the season last year, he's going to make it as well. And then LeBrian Ray, who the Panthers also brought in last year as a rotational defensive lineman. I have him as the 6th defensive lineman here in Carolina. And there wasn't much debate over those 6. If they keep 5, it will be interesting to see who makes it. I would guess it would be Thurman and Crumedy over Ray. Could be. Ray and Crumedy, I would think, will be the ones fighting for that final spot if they do decide to only keep 5. But I think Nick Thurman right there with Brown, Robinson, and Tuttle are pretty securely on the roster heading into training camp here in Charlotte. Edge rushers. This is a group that's a little difficult to project just how many guys will be on there because of the injury to Amari Barno, who tore his ACL week 16 last year against the Packers. We did not find that out until I believe it was either May or June. Dave Canales came out there and said, yeah, he tore his ACL. So that's why he's not out here practicing. I would imagine based off of what we saw last year, different player. I know different timing when it would happen, really only 2 weeks apart. Corbett, he was on the PUP list to begin the season. We didn't see him until after the bye week. I don't think we're going to see Amari Barno on the roster initially. He may be cut and then they do an injury settlement or he gets placed on PUP. We will see. But the fact that he's not going to be on the roster, I don't think he's going to be on the roster, is what's going to limit the numbers here at edge. So Jadeveon Clowney, he's on the team, of course. DJ Woonem, another player. We're tracking his health status. We'll find more about that in the coming days, whether he'll be ready to go once training camp begins. DJ Johnson, he, of course, is back for his second year. We had a little health scare back during OTAs as he went off on the cart, but he turned out to be just fine. So we'll see what he's able to do as he continues to develop. Going to be 26 this year as a second-year player, someone that Ejiro Vera really liked last year in the draft. Cam Gill spent the last couple of years in Tampa, and he is a special teams kind of player. And if you're going to be the fourth or fifth edge rusher on a team, you need to be able to play special teams. Cam Gill, I see him making the roster as a special teams ace and also potentially a situational pass rusher for the Panthers. And then the last guy I'm going to take is going to be Caleb Chason, who formerly a first-round pick, had some things to say a weekend ago about how he feels like he can really be a good player for the Panthers. My hope is that that will be the case. Todd Wash was the DC in Jacksonville when he was drafted in the first round out of LSU. Todd Wash is here now as defensive line coach. Won't be working with Caleb Chason really, but he could in a little bit as far as technique goes. I think that's probably a big reason why he came here. I'll take Chason as the last guy here on the roster when it comes to the edge rusher group. Linebacker, inside linebacker to be in particular. Shaq Thompson, he's back here for his 10th season in the NFL, 10th season as a Carolina Panther, and possibly his last season here in Charlotte. He's back once again. You got Josie Jewell, who comes over from Denver, spent the 2022 season in this defense under Ejiro Vera, who was a defensive coordinator for one season in Denver a couple of years ago before coming to Carolina. He is now here. Josie Jewell is a starter, so Shaq and Josie should get the bulk of the snaps at inside linebacker. Trevin Wallace, third-round pick out of Kentucky, potentially the replacement to Shaq Thompson down the road, maybe even next season. We'll see how that pans out, but he will be the third linebacker. And then the rest of them, as we talked about a couple weeks ago, it all comes down to how many special teams guys are they looking to keep from the linebacker position. I'm going to take Michael Barrett as the fourth guy to make the team here at linebackers. I'm keeping 5. I'm going to take him as the fourth guy as he was drafted by Carolina. This staff sees him as a special teams ace. There's a possibility that as time goes along, he can be more of that hybrid type of player he was back at Michigan the last couple of seasons. I'm taking him on a roster. Then looking at Tay Davis, Chandler Wooten, and Claudin Charles, really it's a coin flip at this point in time. Tay Davis, though, has been noted as really good when it comes to kickoff team. And now that that's going to be really important with the new rule changes, I'll take Tay Davis over Chandler Wooten and Claudin Charles. Claudin Charles, some of the Panthers took last year after cutdowns, maybe get signed to the practice squad. Chandler Wooten, also a guy they could maybe sign to the practice squad, understanding that Chris Tabor's not around. That could change the calculus as far as how these guys are reviewed by Tracy Smith and Darren Bates, special teams coordinators here in Carolina heading into the season. Corner, I'm going to take 5 corners. J.C. Horn, obviously, taking J.C. Dane Jackson is going to be the other starter right now. Troy Hill will be the starter in nickel at the slot spot. And then Shaw Smith-Wade, the 5th-round pick out of Washington State, going to take him as the 4th cornerback here in Carolina. He could play behind Troy Hill, can play right there. And the slot, he could play on the outside, which is what he played in college before getting to the Senior Bowl and being moved inside, where he was a standout there that week, and especially in the Senior Bowl game on that Saturday down in Mobile. Then the 5th guy comes down to Deshaun Jameson and DiCaprio Bootle. I think Jameson gives him more when it comes to special teams, played in more games last year than Bootle did. I'm going to take Deshaun Jameson as the 5th corner in Carolina, although this may be a position the Panthers need to address once cuts happen. Talk about that here momentarily. At safety, I'm only taking 4 safeties. Going to take Xavier Woods and Jordan Fuller. Those are going to be 2 starters. Once again, Sam Franklin Jr., speaking of special teams aces, could be the special teams captain if the Panthers decide to have one, just as one guy all season long as that special teams captain. Sam Franklin has been, one of the best Rule signings considering he's still here. And Matt Rule is long gone there to the middle of America and Nebraska. So Woods, Fuller, Franklin Jr. Then the 4th is going to come down to Alex Cook, Nick Scott, and Jamie Robinson, who the Panthers took last year in the draft out of FSU. Just looking at how things played out a year ago, Cook got more run than Jamie Robinson once he was here in Carolina, especially at that safety spot. Nick Scott really struggled last season when he became a starter in Cincinnati, was benched after 10 games. He comes over after being the worst, according to Pro Football Focus, the worst starting safety in the NFL, maybe even just safety in the NFL. I think that he's someone who would make more sense as a practice squad guy who you can elevate at some point in time in the season if you need to, considering he already knows the defense. And also take this into account. He's a vested veteran. He's played 4 years in the NFL. Vested veterans receive the benefit of fully guaranteed salaries if they are on the roster week 1 of game day. No reason to guarantee his salary when you have players like Alex Cook on the roster and also someone who you drafted a year ago in Jamie Robinson. But looking at Cha Smith-Wade and Jamie, they're kind of redundant. And this coaching staff and this new GM, they drafted Cha. So when you have Cha Smith-Wade, I don't think you need Jamie Robinson. I don't think you're going to take Nick Scott over Alex Cook. I'm going to take those 4, Woods, Fuller, Franklin Jr., and Alex Cook, to make the roster. That's 25 players on defense, 4 safeties. We have 5 corners, also 5 linebackers, 5 edge rushers, and 6 players on the defensive line. Then special teams. This should be pretty straightforward. Eddie Pinheiro, he's going to beat Harrison Mevis. They need to go ahead and give him his money. Johnny Hecker, he's on the roster again. And then J.J. Jansen, the longest tenured Panthers. Those are your specialists here in Carolina this season. So with 25 on offense, 25 in defense, and 3 specialists, which positions will the Panthers likely target once roster cutdowns happen at the end of August? I'll tell you here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right people for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you find professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. In fact, 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So I've told you the 53 who are going to make the roster, at least the way I see it heading into training camp again. The veterans are going to report tomorrow. We'll hear from Dave Canales. We'll likely hear from Dan Morgan. I imagine Bryce Young will talk, and we'll hear from probably Derek Brown, JC Horn, all the stars on the Panthers heading into year 1 of Dave Canales as head coach here in Carolina. Then 9:30 a.m. right here in Uptown Charlotte, the Panthers will be out there on the practice field for the start of training camp, which will end on August 15th, right before their second preseason game against the Jets. They'll have joint practices that day with the Jets, and then it will still be sort of training camp as they're going to be here the whole time. It's going to be different as I wonder, will the players be – I think they're going to have to be they're going to be in a hotel, right? I guess we'll find that out soon. I imagine they have them somewhere in a hotel here in Uptown Charlotte so you can get that training camp camaraderie. Maybe they let them go home a couple of times. I don't know. And then when they stay at Clemson, I'm guessing they're probably going to come back. I don't think they're going to be staying at Clemson. We'll see how all that plays out here, but it'll be different, certainly. And I don't think the field house is ready to go. So if it rains, that's going to throw something into a wrench. Maybe they're back at the ballroom once again, like they had to back under the big cat, Jerry Richardson, in those halcyon days here in Carolina. We'll see. But excited to have training camp back. And it is a tease as they're still practicing, and a lot of the names that we just talked about on the 53, we pretty much know who's going to be on the roster. There's probably like 5 or 6, maybe 7 positions that are truly up for grabs on this roster and in training camp. So we know who's going to make it for the most part. We're just ready to watch some preseason games, even though we're not going to get to see the starters play in the majority of those preseason games. I'm just ready for week 1 down in New Orleans, but I'm happy that there is something once again going on starting this week in Carolina as far as the Panthers are concerned. Which positions, though? Once we get down to August 27th, which positions will the Panthers likely target on the waiver wire once they have their roster cut down? Panthers may have missed out on the number 1 overall pick in the 2024 NFL draft, but they still have the top priority on the waiver wire once roster cuts happen, which is certainly beneficial for a team that desperately needs more talent and is trying to turn around what was a putrid 2-15 season, which has them in this position. So that's a positive. After all the negatives, that is a positive. So the Panthers have their pick of who they truly want once they cut down the roster to 53 men. The 3 positions I'm looking at where I think Carolina may want to add to are wide receiver, edge, and corner. Starting off with wide receiver, I could see the Panthers deciding to only keep 5 receivers and try to sign Jalen Coker to the practice squad. I feel like Terrace Marshall is probably going to be out unless he really plays well. Maybe that he can get his wish and get traded elsewhere. I don't know what his current feeling is. I'm sure he's happy to still be in the league. He wants to get an opportunity. It's a new coaching staff, so that presents another opportunity for him. Last year also presented another opportunity, and that coaching staff brought in Mingo. And this year presents another opportunity, but this coaching staff brought in Xavier Leggett. We'll see how it pans out for him. I'm not super confident in his ability at this point in time based on what we've seen, but also I'm not super confident that he's going to truly get a chance with this coaching staff. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. It's hard to say. I wouldn't bet on it right now. So I could see them only keeping 5, and those 5 would be Mingo in his second year, Leggett, Johnson, Thielen, and then Amir Smith-Marset as the punt returner. Then they could look to find someone else who could contribute in the passing game if they have any concerns about Mingo being ready to have that 4th receiver, or if they want to find someone else also to help out with Leggett and take some pressure off of him and really take pressure off of Johnson and Thielen. I could see that making sense for Carolina. Just depends on who's available. Edge rusher. This is one where, depending on health of DJ Wonnum and the development of DJ Johnson, they may want to go out there and get someone else. Clowney, he's going to be your starter. Wonnum, whenever he's healthy, will be the other starter. But right now, just from what we have talked about, it feels like DJ Johnson's going to get those first team reps as training camp starts, as Wonnum is working his way back. And even if Wonnum is out there, I still think he's probably going to be limited to start things off if he's not starting off on PUP. So we'll see. But Clowney, Wonnum, DJ Johnson, Cam Gill's more of a special teams guy, as I mentioned, and Caleb on Chason, probably your 5th player. How good do you really feel about that group, y'all? You feel good about Clowney based off of he's coming to a scheme that he's comfortable in, terminology that he's familiar with. He comes off a good season last year. He's always had the physical attributes. I'm not going to sit here and be confident that he's going to get 10 sacks. He hasn't done that in a long ass time. So, and it's gonna be difficult too if he's the only guy. Because be honest with yourself. You probably haven't really seen DJ Wonnum play a lot of football. DJ Wonnum played well last year in Minnesota. We talked about his PFF pass rushing grade, and it wasn't great, which is wild because he had 8 sacks and seemed to play fairly well last season with the Vikings, but didn't really spell out that this is a guy who is one of those ace kind of pass rushers. Now he's entering into what should be the prime of his career, coming off an injury. That's going to slow him down. I would think that if I'm an offense coordinator, of the names of this edge rusher group, Jadeveon Clowney, DJ Wonnum, DJ Johnson, Cam Gill, Caleb on Chason, and all the rest, the only guy I'm concerned about is Clowney. I'm sending double teams his way, and I'm not going to worry about the other guy. He's going to have to come out there and beat my guy in order for me to start being concerned about him and start shifting the protection that way. So that's going to make things a little bit difficult for Jadeveon. And I think that's kind of the conversation we had last year about Burns. He needed to get some help. It couldn't just be Marquise Haynes. They needed to find someone else. They brought in Justin Houston. That didn't work out. It does feel like they're in a better situation. If one of them can be healthy than they were last year, I just don't have a ton of confidence in Johnson and Gill and Jason and the other guys behind Clowney and Wooden whenever he's healthy. That's why I think it would make sense for Carolina to potentially target an edge rusher if there is a player out there who fits them once they have roster cuts deep down in August. Finally, corner, and this is ahead of wide receiver. This is ahead of edge when we look at it. They need another one. If it's JC, if it's Dane Jackson, Troy Hill, plus a veteran, that is a much better situation than the one I spelled out for you earlier, where it would be JC, Dane, Troy, Shaw Smith, Wade, who could be a talented player and help them out down the road, maybe even this season, and then Deshaun Jameson or DiCaprio Bootle. I want to see another vet. Stephon Gilmore, we talked about him. He's around. He would make sense if the Panthers can bring him here. And if he wants to be on the team that's coming off of the worst record in the NFL, if he wants to be on a team that can compete this late stage in his career, which I would imagine would be what he would like to do. I wouldn't want to go to the worst team in the NFL personally, but if that's the best situation for him, then awesome for him and awesome obviously for the Carolina Panthers. It would be wild to me that you would want to join the worst team in the league when you've already played for your hometown anyways. But his boys here in Jadeveon Clowney, maybe that's what he wants to do. If he gets the best deal here, gets opportunity to start, which I think there's an opportunity to start here, then they could get him. But they need to find somebody. They were able to get Rasul Douglas a couple years ago. I think it was Rule's first year back in 2020. They had Rasul Douglas as a starter at corner right after roster cutdown days, and he turned out to be a damn good player once he left Carolina and went to Green Bay. Did not see that happening, although he did say a lot of good things about Rule and his staff, coincidentally, after he left. Maybe they can find another player like that. We'll see, but they have to address it. It cannot just be JC, Troy, who's turning 33 shortly, and then Dane Jackson, who's really more of a third corner than he is a starting corner in the NFL at this point in time. So we'll see. Wide receiver, edge, corner. Those are three positions I think that they're likely going to target once they do make the roster cuts on August 27th at 4 p.m. Eastern time. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Friday, the weekly Friday mailbag is back through the rest of the offseason. Once we get to the season, it'll shift over to Wednesdays, but for the remainder of this month, which is, this is the last Friday of the month coming up. And then next month in August, we'll be doing the weekly Friday mailbag. So either at me or DM me, but of course, follow me first on Twitter at Julian Council. Get your questions in for this week's edition of the show. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole as always, and forever keep pounding. And I will talk to y'all on Tuesday as the Vets finally report to training camp here in Carolina.